You know, I feel quite disappointed that, of all places to have beaten me to the punch on talking about the influence and the love I feel for Hotline Miami, that a dev update for Payday 3 of all places dropped the most succinct and amazing overview of the gameplay, the design, the development, and influence of Hotline Miami to the burgeoning indie game scene, with a healthy dosage of wanton violence to truly fit with the themes this game has. So I don't need to say anything, I suppose. Hotline Miami is legendary, go watch Starbreeze's video about the game, and I'll see you guys next time for Halo 3. No, but seriously now, as fun as their video was, and as wild as it is for, again, talking about an update to a completely different game, to have the majority of its runtime be a surprisingly insightful tangent, at the end of the day the Payday 3 video doesn't talk too in depth about Hotline Miami, and does eventually segue itself into talking about, well, Payday 3, the game they're actually there to advertise and promote. So I'll still try my hand at discussing this game that was so influential and eye-opening to me, and do my best to explain why exactly Hotline Miami is legendary. The basic facts of the creation of Hotline Miami start with a small company by the name of Dennaton Games, a company so small that it consisted of literally two blokes whose names I will now pronounce incorrectly, Jonathan Soderstrom and Dennis Widin? I apologise for that. The game was published by Devolver Digital, perhaps the most famous indie game publishing studio out there, notable at the time for the Serious Sam series of games, and post Hotline Miami have gone on to publish beloved indie darlings such as Broforce, Enter the Gungeon, Cult of the Lamb, and even Fall Guys, originally. In addition to reviving older franchises such as Shadow Warrior and Duke Nukem, with re-releases and, in the case of the former, a fairly solid reboot franchise. Despite Devolver's many accolades in the indie game scene, 2012 is what I and many others might consider to be not exactly the best time to be an indie dev. It was a medium that had simply not yet properly blossomed into the juggernaut that it is today, where we see titans of the gaming industry like Sony and Nintendo being mentioned in the same breath and receiving the same awards as a game like Balatro, a silly pixel art card game. In 2012, indie games greatly varied in quality, and while mainstay and beloved indie titles such as Minecraft, Cave Story and Terraria, which are all about going into caves, had already hit the shelves and taken the world by storm in recent years, there were also just as many stinkers out there on Steam and on the Xbox Arcade. For every good indie game I played back then, like The Dishwasher, there were games like Rocket Bird's Hard Boiled Chicken, a game that really exists. This meant that for a lot of people, myself included, it was pretty tough to get excited at the idea of playing an indie game when the inability to gauge the quality of the game you were getting into was a real pain point. But I think that's where the rise of content creators and influencers allowed for indie games to begin to flourish and blossom. No longer would the name Five Nights at Freddy's look like some boring or rushed game. People would see the funny pink mustache man playing it and say, oh, that actually looks fun, perhaps I will buy it and its 40,017 sequels. I can't necessarily corroborate the correlation as absolute fact, but I do think that the rise of indie games and the rise of YouTube as a creative platform are inexorably linked. I, for one, certainly first saw and engaged with Hotline Miami on account of the beloved YouTuber, as he was at the time, Sips from the Yogscast. I saw him playing this strange top-down game with an 80s pixel art aesthetic and banging music, and thought it looked like a real hoot. Upon acquiring the game for myself sometime later, I played through it and did forsooth concur that a hoot it was. And that's when, in around 2012-2013ish, I wish I could be more specific, I first played Hotline Miami. Now you may have noticed that in all my rambling about Devolver and about YouTube and about Yogscast that the actual developers of the game, Dennaton, haven't been mentioned that much. And truthfully I wish there was more I could say about them. The two chaps are talented no doubt, but they haven't really gone up to much else besides Hotline Miami and its sequel, other than a game they had made a year prior called Keyboard Drum Set Bleeping Werewolf. I try to keep these videos PG, but that is seemingly where it all started. Other than this image of one of them having an alcoholic beverage with the community manager and bearded icon of all things Payday, Almir Listo, a man who is irrelevant to this video entirely, I don't know much else about the guys behind this. And weirdly, that actually ties in quite well to the narrative of Hotline Miami, which I suppose should be the next destination on this little journey. After a brief tutorial, our nameless, faceless and voiceless protagonist, dubbed Jacket by most people to refer to him on account of his iconic letterman jacket he wears, finds himself in a peculiar room with three individuals sat across from him with the heads of animals. They're chatting some pretty mysterious stuff that frankly makes little to no sense, with the chicken guy seeming to be the leader of this bunch, the horse guy being both quizzical but somehow the most revealing of the bunch, and the owl guy, he's just aggressive. All that matters for now is the chicken man asking our protagonist if April 3rd means anything to him, with the game now transitioning us cuts to Jacket waking in a small, dingy Miami apartment on April 3rd, 1989, where he receives a package containing a familiar-looking chicken mask and a note listing an address, and to be discreet when placing an item in a nearby dumpster. Hopping into his era-appropriate DeLorean, Jacket arrives at the location and dons his chicken mask as he enters the building. What you have just witnessed is the general gameplay loop of Hotline Miami. It's actually a bit of a scripting challenge in comparison to my other content, since the story is very much backseat to the general wanton violence that the game revolves around primarily. After the job is done, he drops off the package as requested in a nearby dumpster and goes off to a local shop where a kind bearded gentleman that seemingly recognises Jacket insists he grabs himself a six-pack on the house, before he drives home. 5 days later, he receives a message on his answering machine, something that people had in the 80s, once again giving him an address. Jacket drives off, arrives, slaughters every single person in the building, and grabs a pizza handed to him by a familiar-looking bearded man for free as he heads home. April 16th, rinse and repeat. April 25th, Jacket gets told to go somewhere, he goes somewhere and he kills everyone. Now, and I just certainly hope that this isn't particularly shocking news to anyone, and that this won't be seen as controversial to say, but this behaviour is pretty atypical of a healthy-minded person. I, for one, have never knowingly slaughtered an entire building full of people, and if I had done so, I should certainly think I would perhaps question the motives and very existence of the person instructing me to do so, which makes Jacket's seeming willingness to follow orders and go along with things rather peculiar. He seems rather blasé about the whole thing, and while he himself never says any words throughout the game, he doesn't exactly come across as troubled by the whole situation, like he's just going through the motions, clocking into the old 9 to 5 down at the murder office. Jacket may not question the situation or seem perturbed, but I am perturbed. I am quizzical, and I do in fact question the motives and existence of the person instructing Jacket to slaughter entire buildings full of people. I also question why the buildings Jacket is slaughtering are full of people armed with guns, bats, pipes and highly aggressive dogs. Question the package Jacket deposited in that dumpster, and what untoward activities these people are likely up to. It's not a huge stretch to assume that these people Jacket is killing are criminals, which then circles back around to the motives of whoever is on the other end of the answering machine. The game doesn't really give straight answers. It's vague, it's intentionally confusing and disorienting and unreliable in its narrative. Things are made more clear as it goes on for sure, but it doesn't try to give a perfectly clear answer even in later acts of the game or even in its sequel. You can deduce what is going on through research, but at its core, this is a game whose narrative is intentionally a bit unclear, which is totally fine because as fascinating as it really is secondary to the gameplay of Hotline Miami. One hit, you die, one hit, you kill. With that, I have succinctly described the general gameplay of Hotline Miami, and I could realistically leave it there. I don't need to go into any more detail because what you see is what you get. It's a top-down and fast-paced game where you move around a building floor by floor, killing everyone as quickly as you can before they are able to kill you, because any damage you take will result in instant failure and cause you to have to restart the floor. It's a lot like the modern Doom titles in a way, where the logically safest and most assured way to succeed would be to take your time, plan everything out and be really careful. But the game is also a lot more fun if you go absolutely crazy and slaughter everyone you can with reckless abandon, doing everything you can to duck and weave and avoid damage while you perform your flashy combos and slick maneuvers. I think the gameplay and your mileage of it hinges on how fun you find that loop of trying to get the perfect run to be. It's not like the previous games I've spoken about, that much should be clear, as you're not necessarily supposed to feel invincible. You're actually quite vincible, and it can be nerve-wracking to be stuck and surrounded with no viable options to proceed. Whereas getting one-shot by a jackal in Halo 2 was frustrating, getting mauled by a dog in Hotline Miami is almost encouraging. It's a learning moment that I know to adapt to what defeated me and figure out how to weave dealing with that issue into the slaughter next go of it. It doesn't necessarily feel like I've been shut down by an unfair or at least an unpredictable bozo in a place I couldn't have seen coming. It feels like, just as with every enemy in this game, I got outplayed. And it's always possible to avoid being outplayed. It doesn't matter if 5 guys and a dog are running headfirst at you, you can manipulate their rather simplistic AI in a way that you can get the upper hand and put them down first without getting hit as long as you're good enough. Don't get me wrong, I'm more often than not good enough. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not particularly good at this game. Maybe I'm not terrible, but I'm certainly struggled a good few times to make progress in a few missions. But I was able to figure it out, to use my weapons, to use the environment, to outplay the AI and eventually get that perfect perfect run, that perfect hit of dopamine for finishing the floor without once being hit. If something can conceivably kill a man, you can probably use it. Baseball bats, snooker cues, golf clubs, and even some non-sporting goods. You can smack people or throw the weapon at them, with some weapons like beer bottles and the humble brick being particularly adept at bonking someone on the head. Or if you're struggling, you can always seize the enemy's firearm and shoot people, which typically makes things easier but does have the caveat of drawing enemies directly to your location. Failing the availability of any weapon, as Jacket always arrives on scene unarmed, you can just throw hands to knock people unconscious, after which you have to perform an execution. Sometimes you can get away with doing an execution on a person with another weapon too, as smacking somebody in the face with a door will also knock them out and give you an opportunity to give them a rather violent end. You also have different types of masks you can equip, with all the unlockable masks giving some kind of bonus to Jacket, from highlighting unlockables and puzzle pieces, we'll get into that later, to letting Jacket start the level with a knife, giving you a speed boost, or making the entire game poorly translated into French for some reason. I mostly just stuck with the unlockables mask to allow myself an easier time in getting the secret ending, but these all add a nice bit of variety to the gameplay with some fun buffs or some real nonsense. At its core, Hotline Miami is a simplistic game whose gameplay did not require this much discussion. Kill the enemy and try not to get hit, rinse and repeat. That's all, it's fun, it's simple, and I cannot recommend it enough. Before my tangent about the gameplay of this video game, how dare I, we were about to witness Jacket undergo a mission on the 25th of April 1989. The mission once again is pretty standard, though we do have a small boss fight against a guy who refuses to die in one hit as he takes 2 shotgun shells to the face, but the ending is particularly interesting as Jacket finds a kidnapped girl in the back room and rescues her as he leaves the premises. After another bit of respite provided by the same bearded man as all the other shops seem to be run by, part 2 of the game begins as Jacket seems to find himself once more in the room with the 3 creepy animal figures, who sort of attest to a lot of the points raised thus far. Something sinister is going on, and we are lacking any real information as to what it is we're doing. The chicken man, the same as the default mask named Richard that Jacket started out with, gives us 4 questions to ponder. Do you like hurting other people? Who are leaving messages on your answering machine? Where are you right now? Why are we having this conversation? Other than the peculiar wording of that second question, the ominous figures fade as Jacket begins his spree of violence once more. This level has a cool mechanic with a room that's set to blow that you have to deal with, but the one after that is again pretty standard. What is particularly interesting is that the girl Jacket rescued is seemingly staying with him. She's living in his flat and been seemingly getting more and more comfortable over the few weeks worth of time that we see to this point. Now we don't know the extent of their relationship as Jacket never speaks, and so everything is purely based on deduction of the simplistic visuals, but it does seem as though they are at the very least on good terms, if not outright friends or more. Jacket cares about her, although his psychological state is of course still questionable. On the way to his next little mission, there is a janitor cleaning up something in his building which is unusual, though perhaps more unusual is that whilst he is at his next place of business, Jacket scurries along a ledge outside of a window and sees a similarly dressed janitor who is also casually cleaning in spite of the fact that Jacket just gunned down at least a dozen people downstairs, and there's no way this janitor didn't hear all of this transpire. In any other game this might lead to more questions, but let's not kid ourselves about the seeming deliberateness of these cameos. These janitors probably are not janitors, and their nonchalance about everything is probably a sign a couple of people who know more than they should, perhaps even answering one or more of the questions Richard asked Jacket. But with no time to ponder, Jacket heads out to his next slaughter nice and easy and, oh, the phone is ringing here. A panicked voice informs him of a secondary location he has to go to today, and that it's urgent. That's unusual. Upon arrival at the scene, Jacket finds the place littered with bodies of what appears to be workers at this phone service provider. It's not like the people in white suits that Jacket has been hunting down this whole time. This is something different. People who were seemingly killed by this strange biker figure that Jacket finds in a room upstairs. The biker attacks Jacket with a cleaver, swiping if he gets near and throwing it after a few misses, each attempt killing Jacket immediately if he is successful. It's only after dodging a thrown knife that Jacket can hit the biker in the back as he extracts his weapon from the wall, with 2 hits taking the guy down and knocking off his helmet, revealing the face of the man underneath as he insists that it can't end now, and that he is so close. Regardless, Jacket seems to disagree and kills the man, before leaving once again and finding himself talking to the masked figures once more. They don't necessarily reveal anything new this time around, insisting that questions are all they have to offer, and that the next time they meet will be the last, but giving 3 more things for Jacket and, by extension the player, to ponder. Someone you know is not who you think he is, something will soon be taken from you, and on July 21st, you will wake up in a bigger house. Ominous? Jacket clears out a nightclub, and as he heads to the store on his way home, well, something is clearly off here, right? The biker's body is on the floor, and the bearded man tells us things are happening that aren't happening. A strange man is in the bathroom, and the screen keeps flickering. I'm sure there's no underlying message about Jacket's mental state here, or anything untoward that bears worrying about. The next day begins, and hey, I killed 99 dogs. Yay? As we clear out all the guys in this building, sirens blare and snipers line up at the windows to execute us if we cross in their line of sights, adding a lot of additional challenge to this level. I think this may be the non-boss fight level that I ended up having to redo the most when recording this footage, as it's generally just a very tough challenge with how many guys there are and how many guns those guys have. And to make matters worse, maybe, the bearded man is no longer manning the counter at every store. Some bald guy appears to have caved his skull in and taken over his duties. While Jacket doesn't seem to very much mind this, it does raise questions about what he told us the day before, that things look like they're happening when in reality they're not. That is, as I sort of implied earlier on, Jacket's not a particularly reliable narrator in this story and his point of view is warped. Obviously the bearded guy hasn't literally been working at every single store and location Jacket visits. Obviously the body of the biker wasn't crawling back to life, and obviously this new bald man isn't calmly working here while the actual employee is presumably dead. Jacket is a complicated man. It's pretty easy to label him as a simple sociopath, and that his stoic, unspeaking personality and general affinity for violence and mayhem, tied with his hallucinations that cause him to see figures and depictions of violence that haunt him or to envision conversations with aspects of his psyche, are an underlying problem. It's easy to label him in such a way, but it's also not really that simple. He's not just killing people for no reason, nor necessarily because he's being told to. The people he's killing, as evidenced by their treatment of the woman Jacket saved and the various crimes that are visible in numerous levels of the game, are Russian mobsters, who have plunged Miami into chaos and have been ruling the city in secret with an iron fist. Jacket and the people over the phone are all technically and arguably doing a good thing at the end of the day, almost like the Punisher. But just like the beloved Marvel character, this doesn't mean that the criminally insane should necessarily be judge, jury and executioner. Jacket may not be completely out of his mind, and it may not be a terrible thing that he's dealing with the Russians and eliminating organised crime in the city, but scenes like this paint a complex portrait of a myriad of underlying mental health problems. After another job well done, Jacket finds himself returning to a similarly grisly scene at a VHS store he has visited on a few occasions, and whoa, is that a The Office US reference? Oh, that's some obscure comedy right there. And this is the part where, apparently, my recording broke. It got stuck showing this for the next entire hour of recording I did, which perhaps is the biggest blunder I have ever had in recording stuff for a video thus far. Probably being worse than me forgetting to record Jack's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2. So one re-record later, we can continue on with the rest of the game as Jacket continues being haunted by visions of those he's killed and makes his way to his next job. This one isn't too tough, but the cool bit at the end where a car comes careening through the middle of the lobby and a fella starts lobbing molotovs at you is a pretty neat gimmick and adds some fun variety at this late stage of the game. The bald man once again serves, by which I mean he actually refuses to serve, Jacket once more, before Jacket makes his way home and part 4 can begin. Jacket's lady friend is dead on the bathroom floor, and a man wearing a rat mask is sat on his sofa, declaring that he is waiting for Jacket, who he immediately shoots in the face. The game gives us the option to restart, as always, but this time it's all a lie, as this time the chicken is sat on Jacket's sofa, with Jacket's body now also laying on the floor of his flat. He isn't joined by his spooky cohort, it is just him warning that things are drawing to a close and that nothing Jacket does will serve any purpose as he will never get the answers he seeks, urging him to rest in the bed across the hall. Stumbling in, Jacket's head frickin' explodes, man. This is a metaphorical head explosion, of course, as Jacket wakes up in the hospital a few days later after overhearing a conversation between a policeman and a doctor that declared that the man responsible is locked in the police station and isn't answering any questions about what's going on. This level is kind of not very good. The idea is that it's rather subversive and has Jacket sneaking his way out of the hospital without being seen by any officers of the law or medical practitioners. All the while, whatever medicine is coursing through his veins causes the player to rapidly lose control the longer they attempt to move in any given direction. On paper, the idea is interesting. I mean, I never love having control taken away from me personally, but if the intention is to sneak your way out as quickly as possible, then it is at least interesting. But like, I don't know, sometimes you just get seen and I don't really know why. What did I do here to alert this guard that is any different to what I do on this attempt? And with the blinding visuals every time Jacket's head gets hurty, it's just a bit frustrating to try and get out of here. Nonetheless, I make my daring escape from the hospital and Jacket returns home as his delirium wanes. Re-entering the scene of the crime, he digs through his laundry and reacquires his iconic namesake jacket and drives off in what is left of his car to the aforementioned police station. I'll be upfront with you, on this particular day that I re-recorded recorded this, I was simultaneously battling an infection, an unrelated sore throat, and I had a lack of sleep due to both of these factors, and the stress of knowing that the sore throat meant that I would be unable to record my voiceover that weekend as I had planned. Suffice it to say, I was in a very bad mood recording this gameplay. That bad mood is reflected in my complete and utter inability to do this level. It took me 20 minutes just to get past the first floor, and there's 3 floors to this level, where most of the enemies are armed police officers with guns. There's a few with little batons that run at you and a few big dudes with tasers, but for the most part this level is gun central, making it exceptionally difficult because guns have better range than batons apparently. After another merciful 5 minutes I was able to clear out the 2 upper floors, police chief included, and speak to the man in the rat mask in his cell. Turns out it was Baldy, and he was just following the orders relayed to him by the same mysterious phone calls. He urges Jacket to grab the police file on this case, but also doesn't try to dissuade him from finishing his life, with Jacket strangling the man until he turns into a pink Lego head, which signifies death in some cultures. Because of my bad mood, I sort of forgot to actually read any of this text from the case files and spam click through it, but it basically reiterates a lot of what we know now. The clients, which seemingly means people like Jacket, the biker and the Ratman, receive anonymous phone calls and run off to slaughter members of the Russian mafia. What is new is an address that seems to be important, where Jacket runs off to seek answers and revenge for those people hiring a hit on him and getting his lady friend killed. I like this level way better than the police station, and even though there's still a fair amount of guns, I think the layout is just better. We find the boss, he gives Jacket the location of the big boss, the leader of the Russians, and after I for some reason couldn't execute him, making me a little bit confused with what to do next, I was able to actually execute him as intended and proceed to Jacket's final level. He bursts in the doors, kills the 3 people who the boss bothered to hire to protect him I guess, and makes his way upstairs to the man in the chair, who is seemingly quite upset about the numerous masked vigilantes and assassins who have been running around slaughtering the Russian mob. Also, he has 2 pet panthers. Jacket bludgeons them to death with a trophy of all things, and the bikini-clad bodyguard then runs at him with a sword, to which Jacket lobs the trophy at her skull to knock her down, and he does a very long-winded execution on her as she tries to crawl away. This prompts the boss to whip out dual SMGs and rotate around in his little office chair, spraying a tornado of bullets around the room, with the appropriate response of course being to quickly grab the knives the bodyguard dropped and throw 2 of them at him. Truthfully, this is an instance where Jacket being susceptible to one-shot is quite tiresome. You have to land a total of 7 hits on enemies who fight nothing like any other enemy in the game in very quick succession with no real time to react. If you don't already know that you have to throw the trophy or to throw knives, then it's pretty much impossible to realistically predict that you have to do that, and it can make this whole level feel a bit trial and error. I just don't necessarily believe that this game lends itself to this style of boss battle, and while I appreciate the attempt, I do think this is a mechanically weak ending to Jacket's story. Narratively, however, the man shoots himself so as to not give Jacket the satisfaction, and Jacket heads through the elevator and finds an elderly man in a wheelchair who seems to have been the one pulling the strings of the Russian mafia for a long time. He shoots the man and heads to the balcony where he lights up a cigarette and looks longingly at a picture, before casting it aside as the credits roll and the game concludes. 2.5 months prior, Biker is in a bar roughhousing the patron looking for answers, stating that he wants out, that he's done, and he is no longer enjoying it. How is it that we are 23 minutes into the video and yet we have somehow managed not to talk about the music of this game? Truthfully, I'll always admit that when it comes to soundtracks, I often struggle to really identify anything particularly exciting when the music doesn't have lyrics to it. In something like Mass Effect, the majority of the music was very much background, and while I attest that the vast majority of that music in that game is great, I never mention it much in my videos because it's very secondary to me over the story and the gameplay. Halo gets away with it a bit more by having an iconic soundtrack with perhaps some of the most famous music in all of video games present in the background and oftentimes the foreground. So while I've never really dedicated a chapter to music before, and I truthfully don't necessarily know how to go about talking about music because it's not my forte, hopefully the legendary soundtrack has spoken for itself throughout the background of this video. It's vibrant, powerful, electric and fast, fitting not only with the tone of the game and with the story within, but making you feel just excited at all times. To have yet another comparison to the Doom franchise, it really resembles that in a lot of ways, both the old and the new games, where you feel almost rhythmically inclined to follow along with the tempo and go fast in the levels because it just gets you so giddy. On screen, I will show you a few highlights of the soundtrack for you to go and listen to at your own discretion should you wish, and I do believe the vast majority of the soundtrack can be found on most streaming services, though I can only attest specifically to YouTube and Spotify. So go and check it out because it is fantastic every step of the way. The following and simultaneously final 4 levels of the game follow Biker as he searches for answers as to who is leaving the messages. The first stage as this character is very brief and introduces the different mechanics that he follows, namely that he cannot pick up and use any other weapon than his default cleaver, and that his only ranged attack is 3 throwable knives that are limited in their use. You throw one and it's gone, regardless if it hit anyone. Think of the level as a brief tutorial that gives you an idea as to how Biker plays, just a singular flaw that results in his pursuit continuing to the next location. He wakes up in his own apartment, considerably nicer than Jacket's, and much like him, Biker receives a call on his answering machine to go and wipe out the Russians at a specific location, presumably so as to not rouse suspicion and to not get someone trying to kill him. Biker goes and finishes up this job nice and quick, and then continues on his search for answers. This level is really the only one where you get to use Biker's mechanic for an extended period of time, and due to the limited ranged weaponry available to you, it's definitely a tough level. Biker really is a whole different beast to Jacket, and I think categorically his gameplay is worse, solely because it's more limited, but I appreciate a weapon restriction here and there despite of the gameplay, so I think it's a good showcase of an idea that is expanded upon greatly in the sequel. Anyway, the guy Biker spoke to in his first level told Biker to investigate a phone network, and upon entering, it becomes pretty apparent where exactly this is. This is where Jacket killed Biker, seemingly implicating that this will be the end of Biker's journey as he slaughters his way through the offices looking for clues as to the whereabouts of the people on the phone. When Jacket entered the building, Biker initiated the attack and spoke aggressively, but interestingly Biker's perspective implies that he in fact tried to de-escalate the situation before attacking in self-defense, and very quickly killing Jacket in a singular hit. Which is, well, that doesn't make sense now, does it? How could Jacket have died here if we played as Jacket wiping out the Russians? Does that mean Jacket imagined killing Biker? I mean, considering his mental state in general, yeah, that is probably the case. But that also means that Biker probably didn't kill Jacket either, as he too openly admits to liking hurting people when he implied that the killing isn't fun anymore. Besides, I clearly said there were 4 Biker levels and this was only his 3rd. He leaves the building, heads home, and on this occasion blatantly ignores the request of his answering machine to instead head to the location he discovered before his battle with Jacket. He bursts in and heads down into the sewers where he sees the 2 janitors from that one level as Jacket hanging out and mocking him for having sought answers, stating that everything they're doing here is just for fun because they want to see chaos on the streets of Miami. With answers now about who is in charge, the player can choose to either spare their lives or to kill them. I leave them be as I know there's a whole second game to look at in the future, as Biker rides off into the sunset and the game actually concludes this time. He bursts in and heads down into the sewers where he sees the 2 janitors from that one level as Jacket hanging out and seemingly being quite surprised and taken aback as Biker knows what they have been doing. The janitors are parts of a supposedly patriotic American group called 50 Blessings, a sect of terrorists hell-bent on dismantling the Russian mafia by using cryptic phone calls to encourage assassins, hitmen, murderers, gangsters and general sociopaths to do their dirty work or die trying. Their motive being to oppose the Russo-American Coalition, an event in this universe that occurred in 1986 shortly after a nuclear detonation occurred in San Francisco. The agreement was set up to allow the leaders of the USA and the USSR to discuss things peacefully and cordially as a way of de-escalating the Cold War and to ensure that nuclear warfare is staved off indefinitely. The side effect of such a coalition being the influx of Russian migration to America, resulting in the overwhelming force of Russian organized crime across the states, and therefore leading to this shadowy terror sect to form with the sociopathic patriotism of their anti-Russian agenda at the forefront of their murders. Everything they had Jacket, Biker and even the rat guy doing was in aid of their goals to undermine and topple the peace talks and to perpetuate American exceptionalism and the continuation of the Cold War, until their assets were no longer useful to them, at which point they would turn them against one another. Biker was tracking them down, so they sent Jacket to stop him. Jacket was getting too attached to the woman he saved, so they had him shot. And while these 2 specific examples resulted in the men in question surviving, it seems that not only are these 2 organising violence like this on a larger scale, but so is their group across all of America. Nonetheless, satisfied with his answers about the perpetrators of this chaos, Biker leaves, turning his back on Miami. This ending is achieved by obtaining all of the secret puzzle pieces throughout Jacket's levels and assembling the super secret code before Biker interacts with the computer upstairs in the final level. And do bear in mind I filled in some of the blanks of information with stuff revealed in Hotline Miami 2, whilst also doing my best to not necessarily spoil the storyline of that game either. The important thing is that this is a game, this is a series, that portrays these complex characters and showcases violent mental illness in a way that conflates with perceived patriotism. If I were a smarter or at least braver person, I'm sure there would be a lot of political leanings and concepts to dissect out of a game like this. All I know for sure, however, is that it's a really engaging story. During Jacket's moments of retrospection with the three masked figures, he was engaging with his own psyche, his own thoughts and aspects of his fraying mentality that represent his different emotions. The owl, Rasmus, is Jacket's violent tendencies and anger, the chaos that causes him to be afraid and angry, and what likely led to him engaging with the 50 blessings in the first place. It could even perhaps represent part of Jacket's earlier life, but I think we should refrain from talking about that for now. On the other hand, the horse, Don Juan, is more compassionate and caring. He is patient and lenient with Jacket and seems to want Jacket's health to improve, for him to find some way to break through his subconscious and to be happy, possibly even representing the woman he saved who seemed to have this effect on him. The chicken, Richard, is Jacket. He is a mediator of the other two that understands Jacket's goals in life and encourages Jacket to open his eyes and see through the hallucinations and the interference to see what is real. The reason he is the only one left after Jacket is shot is likely because the people the other figures were supposed to represent were dead, and Jacket was only left with the truest version of himself, the version that wanted clarity. Hence the 7 things Richard encourages Jacket to think about. Do you like hurting other people? It's easier to say that Jacket is a complete sociopath who craves violence and destruction, but I think the nuance of this question is that it is ambiguous as to Jacket's real motives at the end of the day, as he never speaks them, though even if he doesn't enjoy hurting people, he is at least very competent at it. Who are leaving the messages on your answering machine? Well, this one we know, it's the janitors. Where are we right now? Presumably, based on the subconscious aspects of these figures, this is Jacket's subconscious, with the actual room itself being irrelevant? Why are we having this conversation? To see the significance of Jacket's massacres, but also to get the player to start questioning things. Do you, the player, enjoy hurting people? If not, then why are you playing such a violent game? The other 3 things Richard provides to think on is his predictions. Something soon being taken from you refers to the girl that Jacket cared for who was killed. Someone you know is not who you think it is a certainly more ambiguous statement referring to one person whose existence seemed to only confuse. The strange man who seemingly works at every store in Miami. And the third prediction was that Jacket will wake up in a bigger house on July 21st, the same day he woke up in the hospital. Overall, the tone of the game is uneasy. It makes you question a lot of what is happening and why, with an unreliable narrator and a focus on a fractured and undiagnosed mental state that leaves you with a bunch of ambiguous questions, and forces you to think critically and to explore far and wide for answers to those questions. And despite everything I've just said, I don't know if any of my answers are necessarily correct. They sound plausible, but it could all just as well be an elaborate ruse to get people like me to try and think critically about something that ultimately doesn't matter. Who cares where Jacket and Richard were talking? Who cares why they're talking? It might matter, it might not. The questions are asked, but the game never truly bothers to give you a straight answer. All you as a player need to wonder is, in my opinion, did you have fun? I did.